Well, just last hour, Prime Minister Mark Carney and U.S. President Donald Trump said they are aiming to reach a trade and security deal within 30 days. This news comes after the leaders opened the day with a positive tone.
U.S. President Donald Trump is meeting right now with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Alberta. This video is actually from moments ago. Let's listen in.
Just an hour ago, a significant development emerged from the sidelines of the G7 summit in Alberta. U.S. President Donald Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney announced their intent to reach a trade and security agreement within 30 days. This announcement came after a morning that began with unusually positive tones, even as geopolitical undercurrents were stirring beneath the surface. The two leaders met privately as the summit convened high in the Canadian Rockies, far from Washington's noise but close to its consequences. Video footage from moments before their meeting shows Trump arriving under heavy security, the symbolism unmistakable. Surrounded by his armored entourage, the U.S. president's presence was a sharp contrast to Canada's calculated silence. That silence, however, was no accident. Earlier in the day, Prime Minister Carney had declined to sign the final summit communiqué, canceled the traditional joint photo with world leaders, and refused to exchange the customary handshake with President Trump. This unprecedented silence was Canada's response to the White House's sudden announcement of sweeping tariffs, 25% on all imported goods, and an additional 10% on energy products. With that, Canada triggered what analysts are now calling the first silent protest in G7 history, a move louder than any statement. While Washington appeared stunned, the rest of the world quickly reacted. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen immediately described the new U.S. tariffs as a minefield laid across the global economy. In a bold counter, she proposed a massive €150 billion Ukraine Solidarity Fund, a joint EU supply pool for critical minerals, and new subsidies for green industries. The message was unmistakable. If the U.S. insists on going it alone, Europe would respond by flexing its market size and policy strength. President Trump's response was swift and characteristic, threatening to raise tariffs again, this time up to 50%, but Canada didn't blink. Instead, it launched a viral campaign titled #, Stand with Steel, which quickly galvanized public and industrial support. Within days, manufacturers from Montreal to Windsor began revising raw material supply chains, pushing economic pressure toward Detroit's automotive heartland. Early economic forecasts suggested a downturn in profits for U.S. industries relying on Canadian inputs. Across the Atlantic, European leaders were also refusing to remain passive observers. French President Emmanuel Macron slammed Trump's idea of turning the G7 into a G9 by inviting China and Russia back into the group, calling it dynamite for allied values. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz added that Russia, while continuing its military campaign in Ukraine, should not be offered any seat at the table. The transatlantic alignment began to look less like parallel efforts and more like two trains on a collision course. Meanwhile, back home in the U.S., a parallel crisis was unfolding. As the summit discussions played out, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, launched Operation Safe Haven, a massive raid in Chicago's Little Village neighborhood. Hundreds of undocumented immigrants were detained without record checks, and businesses in agriculture, hospitality, and construction began to report disruptions due to sudden labor shortages. Economists began sounding alarms, with the new tariffs already raising steel prices and the labor market contracting simultaneously. Inflation was being fueled from both sides. This invisible tax, as some put it, would fall squarely on the shoulders of the American consumer. Back in Ottawa, Carney revealed that Canada had withdrawn the official summit statement before the summit even began. Traditionally, the host country drafts a joint communiqué months in advance, with minor edits contributed by participating nations. This time, Carney shredded that script. No draft, no handshake, no ceremonial signature. His condition for any agreement was simple. The U.S. must roll back its tariffs. Without that, Canada would remain silent. And silence, in this case, was louder than any declaration. Carney's move was a stark contrast to the 2018 steel crisis, when Prime Minister Trudeau signed a joint statement only to have Trump disavow it mid-air on his way back to Washington. Carney clearly did not want history to repeat itself. By removing Ottawa from the media spotlight, He prevented Trump from spinning the summit optics while preserving Canada's negotiating power. Europe's leaders also came to the summit armed with their own countermeasures. Von der Leyen unveiled a 5-point proposal, an additional 50 billion euros for the European Chip Act, the involvement of the European Investment Bank in rare earth procurement, the green hydrogen corridor with Canada by 2030, and a European electric vehicle battery hub. It was a declaration of independence, economic and strategic. France mocked Trump's earlier ambition to buy Greenland, and Germany made it clear that unless Russia halted its campaign in Ukraine, it would not be welcomed back into the fold. As Trump pushed NATO allies for increased defense budgets, no capital made commitments. The unity of the G7, once centered around U.S. leadership, was clearly fraying. Mexico began laying the groundwork for a WTO lawsuit, and Japan submitted a formal petition over the steel tariffs. India, attending as a guest, signaled interest in the EU-Canada critical minerals corridor, hinting at where future alliances might form. Back at the summit, the classic G7 family photo was canceled. No handshake, no signature, no final statement. President Trump reportedly left Alberta in frustration, declaring from the steps of Air Force One, "We'll sign in Washington this time." That statement, while intended as defiance, underscored just how far the U.S. had drifted from its allies. In the U.S., the effects of these actions reverberated quickly. Steel prices rose. Harvests in California were delayed due to missing labor. Truck schedules in New Jersey shifted unpredictably. Oilfield maintenance crews in Texas reported reduced staffing. The Federal Reserve, caught in the crossfire, faced immense pressure. Inflation was surging, and the Powell-led Fed had been planning to reduce monetary stimulus ahead of the 2026 election year. Now their path forward was uncertain. Credit rating agencies like Moody's and Fitch slashed U.S. growth projections by 1.5 percentage points, citing tariff disruptions and immigration policy chaos. The White House remained silent, avoiding economic questions, even as grocery bills and fuel costs climbed nationwide. The G7 summit in Alberta, therefore, may not be remembered for what was said, but for what wasn't. No signatures, no final communiques, no family photo. Yet it will go down as one of the most consequential summits of the modern era. Carney's silence echoed louder than Trump's tariffs. The world began drawing a new map, not defined by American leadership, but by the rising voices of Europe, Canada, and Asia. And now a pressing question hangs over the global economy. Is the United States willing to stand alone behind a wall of its own making? Or will it return to the table, not with threats, but with solutions? If it doesn't, the world may already be preparing for life beyond Washington's lead. And in that silence, new alliances are forming. Free trade corridors are emerging, and global leadership is shifting. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for more updates and content. We've got plenty more coming your way.